foundation of Catherine and Heathcliff's connection in The Wuthering Heights is not built on mutual respect, shared values, or a healthy desire for partnership. I believe it is entirely constructed from the rubble of shared childhood trauma. This adaptation goes to great lengths to visually emphasize the sheer brutality and isolation of their upbringing at the Heights, framing maybe their early years as a desperate war for survival against Hindley's Earnshaw's sadistic abuse. In modern psychological terms, what forms between them is basically a textbook trauma bond, a deep, seemingly unbreakable attachment. This attachment is forged in the crucible of intense emotional and physical distress. Well, because they were entirely ostracized by the world around them, their nervous systems became fundamentally wired to recognize chaos and pain as the only reliable indicators of love and safety. Now, perhaps the most famous line in English literature, Catherine's impassioned declaration that I am Heathcliff. This line has historically been delivered by actresses as the ultimate pinnacle of romantic devotion. In the 2026 adaptation, however, completely recontextualizes this monologue, delivering it as a deeply unsettling symptom of maybe total psychological enmeshment and complete collapse of individual boundaries. Right, here's the thing. To truly understand the volatile push and pull of Catherine and Heathcliff's catastrophic dance, we must view their actions through the lens of modern attachment theory, which the movie's screenplay seems to actually understand. Catherine operates from a deeply disorganized, or as psychologists call it, anxious avoidant attachment style, a direct result of an environment that was simultaneously her only source of affection and her greatest source of fear. She desperately craves the all-consuming intimacy that Heathcliff provides. Yet, the moment that intimacy threatens her social survival and physical comfort, she violently pushes him away, choosing the sterile, safe, and entirely superficial avoidant harbor of Edgar Linton. She wants Heathcliff's soul, but Edgar's societal protection, creating an impossible emotional paradox that shatters everyone involved. Now, Heathcliff, conversely, represents the absolute darkest manifestation of an anxious, preoccupied attachment style that has metastasized into pure vindictive obsession. His entire sense of worth is tethered basically to Catherine's validation. When she abandons him for Grange, his anxious attachment does not result in a quiet heartbreak. It detonates into narcissistic rage. He spends the rest of his life meticulously engineering the financial and emotional ruin of two entire generations of families simply because his primary attachment figure severed this bond. Ultimately, the adaptation, or the 2026 adaptation of The Wuthering Heights, succeeds masterfully because, I believe, it refuses to let the audience or to let us off the hook. It dares to ask why we as a culture are so completely mesmerized by relationships that are fundamentally engineered to destroy the people inside them. So by leaning heavily into the claustrophobia, the psychological manipulation, and the sheer cruelty of its protagonists, the movie completely dismantles the myth of the passionate romance and replaces it with a harrowing tale about the dangers of unresolved trauma and obsessive attachment.
I will wait for you every day and every night. Why do you not respond? I love you. I love you. I love you.
Okay, let me tell you why now, why this adaptation feels more brutal than ever. So Fennell, she weaponizes the physical senses to make the emotional brutality incredibly tactile. She replaces the quiet yearning with an aggressive, almost suffocating sensory overload. Like, for example, by forcing us to look at the physical grim and the bodily fluids associated with Heathcliff and Catherine's feral existence, the movie strips away any comforting romantic distance, making their psychological warfare feel immediate, sticky, and deeply uncomfortable to watch or even witness. Additionally, the adaptation feels uniquely punishing because, well, it takes Emily Bronte's metaphorical descriptions of emotional abuse and translates them into shocking, literal visual tableaus. So where the novel relies on the reader to infer the depths of Heathcliff's cruelty toward his wife, which happened to be Isabella Linton, Fennell leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination, leaning heavily into overt sadistic power dynamics to illustrate their toxic connection. The movie features deeply unsettling scenes, if you have watched it, such as Isabella being reduced to wearing a literal dog collar and being fed on all fours by Heathcliff. So, by literalizing the dominance and submission inherent in a trauma bond, Fennell forces us to confront the grotesque reality of relational subjugation without the protective buffer of poetic, 19th century prose. The brutality here isn't just implied in harsh words spoken across a drawing room, right? It is graphically enacted on the bodies of the characters, turning a classic Gothic romance into a claustrophobic, R rated thriller, maybe, that borders on psychological horror.